I started off muted. Welcome on in to a special edition, a special live edition of Oh So Curious. If you aren't tuning in live, then of course we still appreciate you tuning in. We're going to be talking about, of course, the Paramount hostile bid, a hostile takeover bid for Warner Brothers Discovery. What does that mean for the Netflix and Warner Brothers agreement that's already in place? Of course, we already know that Netflix agreed to pay, what was it, like $82.7 billion to buy Warner Brothers. That's going to be interesting. So yeah, we'll be talking about that. We're going to get into the details of it. Basically, I'm going to try to divide it up in a way that it makes it easier for you guys to be able to kind of dissect what's going on, right? So we'll and hello Monique. Of course, we had Caleb in the chat earlier. D Cole, Right Dude, Dark Lead, Eric, everybody else. If you're watching live, thank you for tuning in. I know that we have another show going on live at the same time, so competing for your attention. That's all right though. Let's dive into it, shall we? I believe we have a couple of things here. Let me just see if I can find the right graphic here. But you guys let me know in the meantime, if you are watching live, what has been your reaction to Paramount getting in on the action, as it were, trying to get their hands on, of course, they want some of that Warner Brothers Discovery IP, and well, they want the whole thing. So we'll talk about that and so much more. Let's get into it, shall we? The WBD bidding war. So here's how we're gonna break this conversation up. So I'm going to break it up into three pieces. Who's going to win ultimately in this bidding war? We don't know yet, but we can, sort of infer based on what's happened so far. So that's where we'll start. What has happened? Then we'll go into what it means, and I'll go through all this information as we go through it. And then, of course, what is next? So let's start off with the what has happened part of the conversation. So the Warner Brothers Netflix deal, of course, happened last Friday. That was announced, from when the show is being done live. $27.75 per share, including of that number, 23.5 being cash and 4.25 being this Netflix stock, is how Netflix plans on paying for this deal. They only want the studios and streaming part of the business, so they don't want the cable networks. That's not what they're after. And of course, they proposed, after the deal was announced, a $3 billion in cost efficiencies, which basically means they're going to be, saving $3 billion by laying off people because there's redundancies and, who works for, Warner Brothers and Paramount and Netflix in this case. So those $3 billion in cost efficiencies, that's how much money they'll save by merging a few departments here and there when the two companies are one. Now, of course, Paramount then went ahead, and I think it was yesterday or 2 days at this point, depending on when you're watching this, basically at the start of this week, right on Monday, we got the announcement that Paramount is, they clearly considered it late last week. They quickly acted on it, and there were rumors building up over the course of the weekend that they might go hostile. That's what they did on Monday, launching what they call a tender offer, which would be a part of a potential hostile takeover of Warner Brothers Discovery. Why is it called hostile takeover? Is because Paramount is taking their offer from late last week, their last offer before Netflix and Warner Brothers came to an agreement, and they're saying that's the better offer, and they feel like the shareholders deserve a chance to vote on that. So the board of Warner Brothers approved the Netflix deal, but now they're going over the head of the board and David Zaslav, the CEO, and they're going directly to the shareholders. And the shareholders have until January 8th, because the offer was made on December 8th. They have a month to essentially either approve, basically decide to sell their shares to Paramount instead of Netflix, and at that point, Paramount could then basically do a hostile takeover. In practicality, what that would mean is, once Paramount, let's say if enough shareholders decide to go in this direction, which, by the way, they won't necessarily be doing that immediately, right? Like, most shareholders will probably take some time to look at the details. And Warner Brothers has said that their board will take 10 days to provide a reply to this offer. So the board, they will get a say in this. But by going over the board's, head per se, Paramount's basically in a position now where if they get let's say over 50% of the shareholders of Warner Bros. Discovery to vote in favor of their offer, then they can basically go in and as with that majority shareholding in Paramount in Warner Brothers, Paramount can then replace and vote in essentially a new board or vote in a majority of members on the new board that will then vote in their favor. So basically, they can go and replace the current board members or add in new board members that create a new majority that is favorable of Paramount. So Paramount doesn't need like 90% or of the shareholders to vote for their offer. They just need a majority, like a simple 50% majority or over 50%, so like 51%. Even 50% would be too, the majority. In fact, like it's the majority number might not even lie at 50% truly. If they just need to reach a number which would give them a significant majority over pretty much any other shareholder, right? Like that could be as low as maybe like 30% or something. It depends on how the shareholdings divide out for Warner Bros. Discovery. If that happens, they can vote in their own preferred board members for Warner Bros. Discovery, who would then vote for the Paramount deal, and basically Paramount. That's what the hostile takeover would look like. That being said, is that going to happen? Well, there's still probably a few things more that might be coming in as we go forward. But just to again kind of go over what Paramount put on the table. $30 per share. This is their all cash offer, so this does not include any Paramount stock, unlike Netflix, which they do and did include a portion of that number that they bid. The successful bid was going to be their stock, and we'll talk about that there because there might be a little bit of a complication in that too. So we'll get into that later. But basically, the Paramount hostile takeover bid. That's an all cash offer. They also are saying that there will be a $6 billion in cost efficiencies. That's twice the number um, of what Netflix has offered or said that they would do, right? So basically, when you think about it, what it all means is Paramount has a lot more overlap with Warner Bros. Discovery in terms of, um, in terms of the businesses. Like you could just imagine this, right? Paramount and Warner Bros. Discovery are both movie studios at their core. They both have TV networks, right? And Paramount wants all of that. They both have theatrical distribution. They both, teams basically. They both do similar things. There's a lot more in common between Paramount and Warner Brothers Discovery than there is between Netflix and Warner Brothers Discovery. But because Netflix is mostly a streaming company, they don't have a movie studio. They don't have a television production, studio. They don't have theatrical distribution. So to basically account for all of that, you can think of it this way. Paramount is going to be able to use that as and that overlap to cut more jobs and therefore twice as much in cost efficiency, $6 billion versus $3 billion. So basically, what that means for people who work at Warner Brothers Discovery and Paramount, if that deal goes through, potentially if they ultimately win, potentially more people will lose their jobs versus the Netflix deal. So to just keep that in mind, because while the Paramount deal is overall a higher cash number overall, remember that number also accounts for everything Warner Brothers Discovery, including the cable networks, whereas Netflix doesn't care about the cable networks. So that's why their number is overall a bit lower, but it's because they don't really care for that. And the 27.75, if you do the difference on that, that's about $2.25 difference, right, in the price per share of what Netflix had offered and what Paramount is offering. That is the implied value of the cable network assets. Basically, Warner Brothers Discovery thought that once they spin off the cable networks like TNT, TBS, and everything next year, that that new Discovery Global company will be worth up to $3 per share. That's the belief of Warner Brothers Discovery. So that's why essentially Warner Brothers, Discovery went with the offer from Netflix because they thought that they were getting a better deal for what they had wanted. So I'm just going to go through what Paramount believes it makes their offer superior, because they believe that the global Discovery Global networks, basically all the TV networks that Warner Brothers owns, they are worth about $1 per share once the new company comes, is spun off. Basically, all the networks becoming their own company. So Warner Brothers believes that new company would be worth $3. And the implied value with the Netflix deal is like 2.25 if you do a straight comparison, because that's the difference between their per share value number that they're paying versus Paramount. Paramount believes it's a $1 value. So you look at all of that, they're comparing their offer, apples for apples, whereas you can't really compare this offer apples to apples. This is Paramount's chart. This is what they shared. They have a website called strongerhollywood.com, which is how they're campaigning to the shareholders to consider their offer over Netflix's offer. So they're obviously, they're saying, look, our offer is superior. All the green check marks are on their side, Netflix, all the X's. If you don't need to go through all of these details, although you're welcome to go to strongerhollywood.com and figure this out for yourself and see what you believe is superior. Paramount keeps insisting that their offer is going to take less regulatory hurdles, like it's going to get approved faster by the US government and European regulators. There's some question to be had about whether that's going to be the case or not. Netflix, of course, believes that their offer will not have any issues. Paramount thinks it will take a lot longer than if Paramount were to buy Warner Brothers, and it's more likely to get blocked on antitrust concerns. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then Paramount is saying, look, shareholders, we're going to give you all cash. There's no stock price component to this, right? Because the reasoning behind that is this: this $4.50 per share of the deal that Netflix has offered, which would be their stock, relies on essentially. Let me see. Did I get that number right? Yeah, $4.50. There we go. I messed that up. So $4.50 of the Netflix deal that they're saying is going to be in their company stock. That relies. This is a technicality, so stay with me here. That relies on a particular range of price. A particular range of price of the Netflix stock that would be somewhere between $97 and some change and $119 and some change. That's what that number is based on. Basically, if the number drops below or over that for the Netflix stock, then that basically the $4.50 per share will also need to potentially budge, because if the Netflix stock price goes over $119 by the time they close this deal, which, by the way, they're not really consummating this deal until Warner Brothers has already spun off Discovery Global next year by 2026, the third quarter, so basically like fall 2026. And if the Netflix stock price goes under the $97 some change mark, which, by the way, it is under that right now, it has dropped under that threshold since this deal was announced by Netflix, then Netflix might need to put up more money. Basically, they might need to up the cash portion of the offer to make up for the lower stock value offer. So the Netflix deal has some complications in that respect, whereas Paramount is saying, look, we're just giving you $30 per share. That's all there is to it. Like, you don't need to worry about what stock values might be and blah, 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 blah. It's right there. That's right there. We're giving you $2.25 more total consideration, and in terms of the overall value of the offer, which when you look at just that value is the anticipated. Paramount thinks they're just adding $1 to the anticipated the total offer value here for Global Networks, because that's what they believe though that company will be worth, whereas of course Warner Brothers Discovery thinks it'll be closer to $3. So if you add that up, then the Netflix offer technically might be still higher, even though that's more of a ghost number because it's not really a real number until Discovery Global hits the stock exchange next year. So Paramount again is arguing that their offer is superior because they're technically offering above the value of what they think Discovery Global Networks will be worth. So all of that said, let's keep unrolling here. We're going to talk about a little bit more of the structure of the deal too. So remember, Paramount is saying, look, you've got until January 8th. Make a decision and they could extend this deadline, by the way. They can extend this deadline. They're also saying, like, once this deal is done, we're just going to buy the company and we'll, this whole thing will be done potentially by early 2027. Like, it might take a year to get it done. Whereas Netflix won't even begin the merging process truly until Discovery Global's already been divested and spun off. So it might take until 2028 potentially, if not longer. Like for example, AT&T, when they were buying Time Warner back in the day before, they sold it to Discovery years ago now at this point, they got sued by the Department of Justice from the government at the time, and it took them like an extra year or so to close things out. Here, like they're saying, Netflix might end up in the same situation. So by the time Netflix gets their hands on Warner Brothers proper, it might be 2028, 2029, meaning the longer that process goes, the more the Netflix share price might fluctuate, and therefore the more uncertainty there is for Warner Brothers shareholders in terms of what they're getting from the sale. That's Paramount's argument, where they're saying our offer is going to clear up much faster because we're essentially buying everything. We don't need to wait for Warner Brothers to divest, the Discovery Global networks. We can just go in and just literally make this happen ASAP, and maybe even get it done by early 2027, basically before the current administration at the White House leaves the office. So and because it's an all cash offer, they're saying that number is not going to change. It is what it is, and it's going to stay that way. So there you go. Then of course, Ted Sarandos and Netflix. You wonder what they thought about this hostile takeover bid, because Paramount went on the offensive and did this press release. They did like a webcast with a Q&A session with the press and media analysts that was invited to it. David Ellison went on TV networks like CNBC and Bloomberg, talked about this. So Ted Sarandos and Peter Burge, who are the co-CEOs of Greg Peters, I should say. Greg Peters and Ted Sarandos, the co-CEOs of Netflix, they're actually at this UBS conference this week, which I'll talk about more later, because they will come into play more, because there's a lot of people there at the UBS conference who have a thing or two to say about this. But the Ted and Peter here, they're of course, Greg, Ted and Greg of Netflix. They of course were in this public space in this conference, and Ted Sarandos said, look, this takeover bid for Warner Brothers by Paramount was entirely expected, but we have a deal done. We didn't buy this company to destroy that value. He was talking about more the theatrical side of things. We will talk about that more later. So Netflix knew this was coming, and if you believe the insiders, they're talking about this, then David Zaslav and Warner Brothers also at least expected this to be potentially happening. Hey PLO. Paramount has the Saudi money. I'll talk about that too, because while they do have it, it's not as much as some people were anticipating, and it may not mean as much as people were thinking it might have, right? So now let's move on from what has happened, because now we know what the offers are. Netflix has already signed a contract with Warner Brothers to enter into this deal. So if status quo remains, then Netflix will ultimately own Warner Brothers Discovery, unless it's blocked by regulators, whether it's in the US or abroad. And that deal is for $27.75 per share, including a majority of it in cash and a portion of it in stock. And there might be some complications around that. We will get into that later. It's for the studios and streaming, part of Warner Brothers only. So all the movie studios, TV studios, and HBO Max streaming side of things. Whereas, Paramount's hostile takeover bid, which was their last offer last week, before, and they were submitting that offer pretty much the same day as Warner Brothers and Netflix, entered their official agreement. That offer was for $30 per share. It's all cash, no stock. It's for all of Warner Brothers Discovery. So they're arguing that's why the number is a bit higher, because they want the whole, caboose, the whole 9 yards, everything. And they don't want just a piece of the pie. They want the whole pie. But you could see that, a post merger in both situations, the companies have said, Netflix and Paramount, that they'll be saving a bunch of money. Netflix says they'll save up to $3 billion in the first 3 years of owning Warner Brothers. Paramount has said that they will be able to achieve cost efficiencies of $6 billion in a similar period of time. Why? Because Paramount has more overlap with Warner Brothers. They both do very similar things, whether it's studio, movies, or making TV shows, whether they're for their own networks, which they both own their own television networks. Netflix does not. Or, whether it's for the streaming side of things. They both have streaming services, which are more likely to become one. Whereas Netflix has said they will keep HBO separate. They will keep HBO Max around for the foreseeable future. They'll keep Warner Brothers, doing what they do right now, theatrically speaking. And, for the most part, believe it or not, or for however long, we don't know. But basically the plan is that, Netflix would largely leave Warner Brothers intact the way it is, whereas Paramount would mostly start merging a lot of pieces. There's still some questions about what's going to happen with the 2 studio backlots. Netflix most likely keeps the Warner Brothers backlot, we're in Burbank, whereas Paramount, I mean, do they really need 2 studio backlots? That will be another question. But that aside, that's where we are, as a result of the events. What does it mean, right? Let's talk about these 4 bullet points here. So Paramount values Warner Brothers cable networks at $1 per share, right? I mentioned this earlier. So what does that mean? Basically, they believe that the cable networks are not worth as much as Warner Brothers believes them to be, because they value them at around $3 per share. Netflix offer to Warner Brothers includes that, I talked about it, this element that the cable networks will be spun off by late 2026, Q3 of 2026. So let's say around September or October at the latest. And then what the remaining Warner Brothers will start to merge with Netflix. So up until that time, Netflix is not really, owning Warner Brothers. Up until that, it's all on paper. There's no real changes happening until that time. And when that spinoff happens, the shareholders of Warner Brothers will get whatever value Warner Brothers, the cable networks, or the new company Discovery Global has, whatever value that has is basically what the shareholders will get, because they'll all get stock in that new company. So media analysts, people on the outside looking in, because clearly we have different numbers here. Paramount says $1 per share for those cable networks. Warner Brothers thinks it's closer to $3. Netflix is just staying out of it. It's saying you do the spinoff and then we'll do the merger. So whatever, that number comes out to be for the stock value, it is what it is. So Netflix is sort of like, neutral on that. What the price that they're paying is for Warner Brothers post spinoff. So after the cable networks are gone. Now, the media analysts who are on the outside looking in here, their estimates are ranging anywhere from $1 to $5 per share. So nobody really seems to know or agree on the number for what those Discovery Global Networks business will be worth. Now, it will be a cash-rich business because they are making a lot of money still, the networks. So it's more cash-rich, is the business term. But it's not a growing business like streaming companies are, like a Netflix, for example. So while it is cash-rich, it's not a company that is expected to grow if they keep doing what they're doing. So there's a comparison here for that, right? So let's start to dive into this part of part of it, because Versant is a good comparison. They were just spun off, or they're about to be spun off by Comcast. Similar situation. Most of Comcast's networks, minus Bravo, the NBC Broadcast Network, and the Peacock streaming service, pretty much everything else like Sci-Fi, USA Network, MS Now, which used to be MSNBC, CNBC, and a bunch of other networks that NBC Universal owns under Comcast are being spun off into their own company called Versant. They're gonna get on the stock market later this month in December 2025. Now, like I said, the media analysts currently are predicting anywhere, depending on who you ask, $1 to $5 per share for the Discovery Global networks. The what Warner Brothers is gonna spin off next year. Versant is a good comparison because they're already sort of in a similar situation with a similar portfolio of networks. They go public later this month. So once they do, they will have a stock value number. And so, at that point, we'll probably get a better idea of, what all of that equates to in terms of, if it's kind of like when a movie comes out at the box office, we talk about, okay, so Avatar, the next Marvel movie made this much money at the box office. Let's compare that to the previous one. The Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 opened to XYZ at the box office. What did Guardians of the Galaxy 2 do? Because they're good comparisons. Or like, what did Superman do versus Guardians of the Galaxy 3? Because they're both James Gunn movies, right? Similarly, when we get a stock price for Versant, that's going to give us an idea of what maybe Discovery Global's stock price might end up being. But will it? Because the Versant doesn't will not be carrying as much debt as Warner Brothers is going to slop on to Discovery Global. Like majority of Warner Brothers Discovery's debt is going to go with that company. So the extra debt probably means a lower stock price. And that's one of the things Paramount is arguing, which is a good argument to make. So this is really one of those big things and this is where the price difference comes from in the two deals. And even though, Paramount is paying for all of Warner Brothers Discovery and Netflix is paying for just the studios and streaming. So let's dive into what it all means, right? And I've been sort of going over the highlights, but let's dive into a little bit more carefully. So Warner Brothers Discovery, of course, has looked at this Paramount offer and says they will carefully review this offer, and they'll issue a recommendation to their shareholders in the next 10 business days. What they've also said is that, just hold off on the shareholders. They've told their shareholders to hold off on making any decisions or selling off their shares up until that time, right? So they're saying Warner Brothers Discovery intends to advise its stockholders of the board's recommendation regarding Paramount Skydance's tender offer within 10 business days. And that they're advising the stockholders to not take any action at this time with respect to the Paramount Skydance proposal. Basically, they're saying, don't do anything. Let us figure out what this means, and then we'll tell you what our recommendation is. Paramount is saying, ours is a better offer. Just take it. It's so much better. It gives you like almost $18 billion more in cash, and blah, 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 right? So Paramount is making their case. But Warner Brothers board, as of right now, has said they're not modifying their recommendation with respect to the agreement with Netflix. So they can stay with the Netflix deal until they change their mind, which they could, in 10 days time, which will be actually 10 days ends up being next week. So it's technically, I believe if you do the math from December 8th to, what is it, like, I think they mentioned the 10-day mark would be 10 business days, by the way. So it's that will be next Friday. So I believe that ends up being December 19th. There you go. So it's December 19th, the next business day. Oh, so the 2 weeks from when this deal was offered. I don't know why that page just popped up. But basically, Warner Brothers Discovery Board will make their decision and put that out there. Like, if they change their mind or they don't change their mind, they will let us know by next Friday, the 19th. Now, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot on the line here. Like, Netflix has all of this coming their way if things stay the way they are right now. And remember, none of these are the cable networks themselves. So that's getting spun off, right? Now, getting further along, you guys might be wondering, why did Paramount not win this, bidding process in the first place? Because remember, they put in 3 bids before the official bidding process started, and then they put in 3 bids as part of the official bidding process. How did they end up losing? They had a head start on this. Everybody thought they basically had a clear track. They were the front runners. Well, according to some reporting, it looks like the part of their funding does include Middle East sources, including Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. I think Abu Dhabi specifically. Their sovereign wealth funds make up for around 24.9, I think roughly $25 billion with a B, of the total amount that Paramount will be paying. So that was something that the Warner Brothers Discovery folks, the board, were just not sure about, because they were like, look, they can back out. There's usually an extra regulatory review process with what an interagency department at the U.S. government called CFI US, which basically reviews any transaction that allows foreign companies to get a significant share in a U.S. company that could potentially lead to a national security interest issue, aka similar to what they did with TikTok. They decided TikTok couldn't be owned by a Chinese company, so ultimately ended up being sort of partly sold off, at least the American version sold off to American companies recently, right? So not saying that this would happen exactly, but Warner Brothers just weren't sure. They were like, we don't want to, that's an additional hurdle that we don't want to, get into. We don't want that, because that could be one other way that this deal could get blocked. So basically what they said, they told Paramount is, look, you need to assure us that that's not going to be a problem. And why don't the Ellisons just back this up? They've got the money. Why are they getting $25 billion from the Middle Eastern funds? They've got their own money, right? So why not just go with the money that, like, the David Ellison is the son of Larry Ellison, and Larry Ellison is like the second richest man in the world. He's worth over $250 billion, depending on the day you look at the stock value of Oracle, the company that he has co-founded and currently runs. So why not just put more of their own money up, because they only were putting up, I think, like $10-15 billion of the money. Well, Paramount went ahead, and in their final bid, not their final offer, but their last bid in the process last week, they basically put into the SEC filing, which is the official documents with their offer, that the Middle Eastern funds, they were foregoing their governance rights. So aka they, for the $25 billion roughly that they'd be investing in this deal for Paramount, on behalf of Paramount, they wouldn't have any, say in what Paramount does moving forward. The new Paramount, Warner Brothers combined company. So that was one way that they were trying to address any concerns Warner Brothers had about the review, the additional government review. But also they were then they put into the deal that the Ellison Trust will backstop, aka they will back up that funding from the Middle Eastern sources, basically saying if for whatever reason the Middle Eastern sovereign fund wealth funds pull out of this deal, and all of a sudden they're not committing the $25 billion, which by the way, they signed a lot of documents which are binding, so that's not likely to happen. But let's say it becomes a regulatory hurdle anyway. Basically, as part of the latest bid, the current bid that Paramount has gone to the shareholders with, they said that, look, the Ellison Trust backs up that number. That 25 billion, if the US government or the European regulators or whoever else says we can't have that be part of the deal, the Ellisons will make that number. They will put up the $25 billion. They guarantee that number. And so by saying that if the Middle Eastern funding continues to be a part of the deal and until it gets finalized and the sale happens, that those Middle Eastern funds forego any say in the future of the company, the new Paramount Warner Brothers merged company, and saying that the Ellisons back up that money in case the regulators force the Middle Eastern funding out of the picture. Paramount thought they addressed all the concerns. But that wasn't all that they did, because one of the other things that Warner Brothers was wondering is there was $1 billion in the overall package that Paramount was offering, which is worth $108 billion in total. Of that, 1 billion, basically less than 1% of that number, was being invested by Tencent. Tencent, they own WeChat, they're one of the biggest media and technology conglomerates in the world. They're, of course, a Chinese company, and they had $1 billion of funding in this. They had a very small minority stake, potentially, if Paramount won the bidding process. But they also pulled out. So basically, the last offer, the current offer that is out to the shareholders from Paramount, does not include that $1 billion from Tencent. It includes guarantees that the Middle Eastern funds will not have any say in the new Paramount Warner Brothers company if the deal goes through. And that the Ellisons back up all of that funding. Like if any of those foreign sources need to pull out because of regulatory issues, then the Ellisons will back up that number. So they thought that was it. Like, they had not only the highest offer on the board, but also the simpler offer on the board. Like, it was an all cash number for the whole company. There won't be spinning off anything by Warner Brothers, and it wouldn't include, have to wait until next year when the Discovery Global company would be spun off. They thought they had and they had addressed all of the concerns, but apparently that last offer during the bidding process, again, not the final offer for Warner Brothers, because David Ellison has said this is not our final offer, but late last week, Warner Brothers just kind of stopped giving feedback to Paramount. Apparently David Zaslav stopped replying to his text messages, and this is all in the SEC filing. They detail all this out. David Ellison had been courting Warner Brothers for a long time. They took David Zaslav on a dinner and talked about this. They met over virtual calls, Zoom calls and stuff, in person. Both David Ellison and Larry Ellison, and apparently in the NDA that Paramount had signed with Warner Brothers, there was a specific piece of it which specified, by the way, hello everybody else watching, hello Darklead Eric, hello Angelica. I don't think Apple's going to bid unless they do a hostile takeover bid like Paramount, so I don't think they'll be concerned here. And look, Paramount could potentially go for Discovery Global later on, so we'll talk about that in a moment too. Darklead Eric saying, I think I heard that the network spinoff is likely to have 50 million in their back pocket. Yeah, but also that is against like having billions in debt. Like, the majority of the 36 odd billion dollars that Warner Brothers Discovery has in debt, the majority of it will be laden on top of the Discovery Global's company. Yeah, Apple is also not interesting. The bidding process was over, so they would really need to come in and go over the top. So there you go. Apple has, money in the bank, probably not enough to finance the whole deal, but anyway, the point is we're kind of past that point. At this point, if you're not already in the conversation, you're not entering it. Comcast already said this is too high, so we're not going to do it. So Comcast is out as well. Now, apparently, so like in this Paramount SEC filing, which is which they did to make public their intentions for the hostile takeover offer for Warner Brothers, they said, "Look, we were in touch with David Zaslav, which apparently there was an ND, every company signed an NDA to enter into the bidding process so that none of the details were being, they weren't negotiating in the public. They want to make sure that this is done in private, because if you negotiate in the public eye, that can, have an effect on the ultimate, price. So as a part of the process in the beginning, every company, Comcast, Netflix, and Paramount had to sign NDAs. Apparently, Paramount said in their NDA, it was specified that they could not directly talk to anybody on the board of Warner Brothers. They had to go through the legal representation of the two companies. And the only person they could talk to directly was David Zaslav. Everybody else, they would need to get prior written, authorization from the Warner Brothers Discovery to talk to. So basically David Ellison was talking to David Zaslav personally, directly. They went out, they hosted him for a dinner and all that stuff in Beverly Hills and blah blah blah. And then the day of the in Netflix and Warner Brothers announcing their deal, that morning Paramount had submitted their latest offer, and David Ellison texted David Zaslav several times, including saying in one of the text messages it would be the honor of the lifetime to be a partner and to be the owner of those iconic assets. And he said that, he texted that to him on Thursday. And then on Friday morning, they of course, everything went down. So you gotta wonder, like, Warner Brothers Discovery's board and David Zaslav at that point must have already made their decision. That's what all the reports were saying. And that's why they just, stopped, I guess, picking up Paramount's phone calls and responding to their messages. It's sort of like if you got ghosted, like, if you imagine, like, you're just like dating two girls at the same time. This is a bad comparison, but imagine if you are dating two girls at the same time and you're like trying to figure out, like, if if you're gonna break up with one and just kind of like go exclusive with the other, right? And in this case, it seems like Paramount got the silent treatment, and that's why they made all their public outcry last week with a letter saying, look, they're taking the Netflix offer, everybody, and it's not going to be a fair deal, because they knew that David Zaslav had stopped answering their messages and they weren't getting any feedback on their latest offer, so they knew something was up, that Netflix had the upper hand. But that aside, obviously you could imagine, like, some of this, some of this, not anger, but maybe disappointment and maybe anger. I don't. David Ellison probably is angry about it. Is because Warner Brothers simply just stopped responding, and that was before they announced the Netflix deal. So Paramount found out about the Netflix deal right as everybody else did, right? Because they weren't getting any responses, they weren't getting any feedback anymore from Warner Brothers. Now, one of the other things I forgot to mention earlier, apparently this might be play a part when it comes to regulatory approvals in the U.S., but apparently President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner's Affinity group are also one of the investors in the Paramount deal, Affinity Partners, and so that might be another, like, hedging your bets by the Ellisons, saying like, hey, we got an inside track on the president through his son-in-law being involved in this. Obviously a lot of the and then the Ellisons themselves are big friends of the current Donald Trump right now, right? So we that's public knowledge. That's one of the other reasons why they keep saying our offer is going to get approved a lot faster by the government than if Netflix were to continue on with what they've done. But all of that said, like, here in this article, you could tell, like, the Variety took directly from the SEC filing the chain of events. This is a whole timeline. It extends all the way back to September, and all the way till the end. And the last week when it all went down, like November 22nd, and throughout this whole process. And remember, I mentioned earlier, Paramount submitted 3 official bids in addition to the 3 that they had submitted unofficially before the bidding process that started. They basically are the ones who forced the bidding process to begin in the first place, and that's when Netflix and Comcast got involved, right? So all of that said, let me see if I can find this, because David Ellison did text David Zaslav, I think, like one last time, and there was still no response from David Zaslav, and it's kind of funny. It's funny in the sense that, of course, like, he got ghosted by David Zaslav, like David Ellison did, but publicly he's like, still like, I am, I would still love to be the new owner of the Warner Brothers IP. I can't really find it. This is a lot to get in. Oh, here it is. Okay, so following the the submitting of the offer, David Ellison texts Zaslav saying, "Just tried calling you about the new bid we have submitted. I heard you on all your concerns and believe we have addressed them in our proposal. Please give me a call back to discuss in detail." Didn't hear back from that, and it just, I think later on he texted him again, and still didn't get any response. And then of course we got the official announcement on December 5th and 6th. And then, at that point, by Sunday, the Paramount board were discussing going over, their latest offer that they had submitted and saying, we're going to make this a hostile takeover bid. We're going to make a tender offer to the shareholders of Warner Brothers Discovery and see if it wins out, because we believe it's the better deal. And that's what happened. That's what's kicked off this week. Now let's go back to talking about one of the big things that none of the people can agree on. I mentioned this earlier. Let me go back to this here. This is a big point of contention. What are the TV networks actually worth? Because once they get spun off next year, if this Netflix deal stays in place, will they trade for like $3, which is what Warner Brothers believes it would probably trade at? Or will they trade for about $1 per share? That's what Paramount thinks of it. But Netflix doesn't really have a say in it. They're just like, we're going to wait until you guys do this, then we're going to merge the two companies, Warner Brothers and Netflix, that is. Media analysts seem to think is $1 to $5, somewhere in that range. Nobody really knows for sure. Depending on who you ask, they'll give you a different number. But really, I know you guys are talking about this. Dark Lead Eric, you mentioned that the reports are that the Discovery Global will have around $50 million in cash on hand. But that's going to be just completely overshadowed by the fact that they will have billions of dollars in debt. NBC Universal is giving Versant a very small amount of debt compared to that, like a couple of billion at most. We don't know the exact number, but that's about the estimate. It's like a few $1 billion. So they can pay that off pretty quickly, the new Versant company. So, rich co versus poor co. Versant is actually going to be a lot richer than, the Discovery Global would be. Not all spin-offs are created equal. This is an old article from earlier this summer, but I think it's completely valid in talking about it. Discovery Global will have a lot of debt, so that will drive down their stock price. And that's what Paramount is saying. Even though they will still be a cash-rich company, because TV networks still make a lot of money, but it's not growing, right? And they've already announced, both companies, both Discovery Global's potential new management and Versant have said they'll find ways to evolve their companies away from just television revenue, because they know long-term they will just die if they don't. But I think all of this goes to say that potentially the new Discovery Global company is probably not going to be worth as much as a Versant would be. We're going to know what Versant's going to be worth coming up, in a few weeks' time, when they become, an officially in their own company. Until then, until then, we don't really have anything but the estimates. So that's one of the big things. That's where we are at right now in terms of what all of this means, because that's the difference in the prices. Again, Paramount saying $30 for the whole company, Netflix saying $27.75 for just the studios and streaming. If you add another $3 on top of that, which is what Warner Brothers believes the cable networks are worth, that the Netflix is not buying, then Netflix's offer is technically superior. But is it though? Let's get into that. Right now, I mentioned let's talk about what's next. I mentioned earlier, both merger deals will potentially face regulatory scrutiny, because they're just creating a really big company. At the end of the day, Netflix is the biggest streaming company out there. I believe there was a research paper, report put out recently I think I saw this in a Bloomberg podcast earlier today, where they were saying that according to this research report, firm that did this, the numbers, they believe that it's roughly like 60% of HBO Max subscribers are also Netflix subscribers, whereas only around like 40% of Paramount subscribers are HBO Max subscribers. Meaning that if Paramount merges with HBO Max, there'll be a bigger percentage of HBO Max customers that will join in with the Paramount Plus customers, whereas with Netflix, there'll be a slightly smaller percentage of HBO Max net new customers that will add up to Netflix's already 300 million customers. But Netflix will still probably end up adding close to 100 million, new customers, right? Because HBO Max has like 130 million of their own. So Netflix will become by far and away the biggest streaming company in terms of, streaming video on demand, or premium video on demand. or I think they call it SPVOD, streaming premium video on demand, whatever. It's not quite, the same as like YouTube because this YouTube is free. But YouTube is actually, Netflix is arguing YouTube is the bigger company in the streaming world. Now, of course, there's a lot of different elements to this in terms of regulatory scrutiny. Let's talk about this. Of course, President Trump was at the Kennedy Honors. He actually hosted it, the first time the president has done it, I think, ever, which is weird. But anyway, he did it. He hosted it, and at the Kennedy Center Honors, which I think is always airing on CBS, by the way, Paramount company. David Ellison was there, and Donald Trump, of course, was there. And President Trump said, "Look." He was asked about the Netflix deal with Warner Brothers. He said it's a very big market share and it could be a problem, saying, despite the fact that Ted Sarandos had met up with Donald Trump leading up to this deal, and of course David Allison has a good friendship with President Trump anyway. He was still doubting the deal for Netflix. Like, he's saying there might still be issues here, and at the same time he was also talking about how he's mentioned. I mean, I think it was this morning, on Tuesday morning, he put out a tweet saying that the new owners are just as bad as the old ones in terms of talking about Paramount owning CBS, or Skydance Paramount now owning CBS, because they interviewed Marjorie Taylor Greene for 60 Minutes, which of course is a big rival now, one of the enemies of the president. So, there's a chance that things can go either way. But ultimately, I'd be willing to bet if President Trump had to make a pick, he would pick the Ellisons because he's got a longer relationship with them. Like, one of the people that purchased the American version of TikTok earlier this year was Larry Ellison, alongside Rupert Murdoch and stuff. So he's got a relationship with the Ellisons, whereas Ted Sarandos might have tried to woo Trump, but like if he was forced to make a choice, which by the way, usually presidents don't really have a say in business deals like this, but we know this president works differently, so whatever. But all of that set aside, the legal scrutiny is not the only thing here, because movie theaters have been dreading this deal, regardless of which way it goes, because with Paramount, they're kind of worried, like, will Paramount be able to keep up the same level of output that Warner Brothers currently has on its own? Like, will they continue to make the same amount of movies that Paramount and Warner Brothers make separately once they're all one company? With Netflix, they're like, we're about to like reach a tipping point, because once you get that past that point, it's not like there's just diminishing returns. It's just like you fall off a cliff. Like, the whole system will crumble and theaters will basically start shutting down en masse, because cinema owners have fixed costs, which is true. They have fixed costs. Like, it's not like you could just keep going and slowly the theaters will keep dwindling. Like, if AMC theaters goes out of business, all of AMC theaters goes out of business. If Regal Cinemas goes out of business, all of them go out of business. And this is not just the US, it's all around the world. So movie theater owners, Hollywood producers, they're all just deadly worried, especially if Netflix ends up, winning this deal ultimately, which they currently, as things stand right now, Netflix will own Warner Brothers Discovery, and we know how Ted Sarandos feels about movies in theaters. So, they're kind of in panic mode. They're warning of a theatrical collapse. And Hollywood insiders, I specifically was watching Matthew Belloni doing an interview with, I think, CNBC, mentioning that producers in Hollywood are all hoping their preference would be that both deals, whichever way this goes, Paramount or Netflix, that they both get blocked by regulators, because they believe that Warner Brothers is its own independent studio, one of the last of the legacy studios from the golden age of Hollywood. Being its own thing is the best thing for the business, especially for the theatrical movie business. That whether it's Paramount buying them or Netflix buying them, in both instances, it takes one more player off the board, one more buyer for the new movies that producers are working on that they can sell to a studio. Like, one more of those, piece of buyers is not there in the market anymore, which makes sense, because if with a bigger market share, remember in the latest Hollywood strikes, Netflix was one of the people that were really driving the wedge in the middle, holding back on saying, like, we're not going to pay you guys as much, to the writers and to the to the actors and stuff. Netflix was one of the outliers. They were the ones who had to like really get reeled in from the studio side of things. And now if Netflix owns Warner Brothers, they'll have even more influence on that and that would probably mean the actors get paid less. production assistants, writers, directors, producers, everybody who works on movies and TV shows gets paid less because there's less competition. Competition drives prices down, right? Like that's why you see a McDonald's on the opposite of the street from, Burger King, from Wendy's, because that's why the prices stay low. If all of a sudden McDonald's bought Burger King and Wendy's, then they'll be able to charge you more because they're like, who else are you going to go to? Chick-fil-A? Yeah, go like 2 miles down the street. You might find a few in the state. Like, like it's less competition means higher prices and lower salaries because there's not that competitive pressure. Capitalism, that's how that works. I'm being a little sarcastic, but anyway. Hey Hunter Iggy, how are you doing, man? I see a lot of new names in the chat, by the way. We're covering this news as it comes, and so we're here 5 days a week. Do subscribe if you're here new. 80% of HBO Max subscribers to Netflix. That's an even bigger number than what I heard from that research study. So thank you for pointing that out. I mean, again, the exact number we're not quite sure of, but that's a reported number. Saberclaw saying bulk of the cash flow comes from the cable assets. Yes, for both Paramount and Netflix, that's true. Or not Netflix, but both Paramount and Warner Brothers, that's true. And for both the NBC Universal networks, yeah, that the cable assets make a lot of the money, but they are not growing, so they will decline over time. And that's why Ellison wants them, because that's where a lot of the job cuts will come from, and Paramount wins. That is true. That is true. That's why they'll achieve twice as much in, efficiencies, cost efficiencies. $6 billion versus Netflix's $3 billion, because Netflix doesn't have cable networks, right? Yeah, so Mr. NYC81 saying Ted Sarandos gave an update on the movie releases he wants. Yes, that's right there. So as a result of all of this, as a result of Hollywood, being in total uproar about all of this, well, Netflix's CEO Ted Sarandos recently just sort of changed his tune. This was earlier today at the UBS conference I mentioned before. He said, look, when this deal closes, we are in the theatrical business. Like, we've not been there before, but we are in the theatrical business, and we're gonna do it. We didn't buy this company to destroy that value, meaning that they're not gonna walk that back over time, even though just days ago he said that they're gonna look to evolve the theatrical windows over time to be more consumer friendly. Read that as shorter windows, kind of like what Netflix does with their own movies right now. So people are worried. But now he's saying, look, we're going to be in the theatrical business. We're going to do this. We're going to do this proper. We're not going to change things up and all of a sudden destroy the value, because that's partly what makes Warner Brothers as valuable as it is, which I still don't believe, Ted Sarandos, because really a lot of Warner Brothers value comes from their IP, from the franchises that they own, which, by the way, shameless plug, after DCU Daily that John is doing right now, later on, and just after I do this show, we're going to do a tier list Tuesday ranking the 25 most valuable, the most important, the biggest franchises Warner Brothers owns. There's a lot of them, and there will be some honorable mentions because we can't fit them all in the tier list. Warner Brothers has a lot of IP. They've probably got the best set of IP outside of Disney and all of Hollywood. That's what Netflix is paying for. The theatrical business is a theatrical business, yes, but Netflix could, and I might sound cynical, but if they decide in 5 years' time that they're not going to put any Warner Brothers movies in theaters anymore, they would still, have the benefit of all the IP that they got from Warner Brothers, right? That still is the most valuable thing. But Ted Sarandos is trying to say now, look, we're going to be in the theatrical business. We're not going to change that. That's what we're going to do. We didn't buy Warner Brothers to destroy that value. And I get that. Look, he's trying to reassure a lot of worried folks in Hollywood. But do we believe him? That's really the question. That's really the question. Hey, M2G. Hope Ted isn't lying, because when theaters close, they're the hub of several congregation centers where restaurants and other stores, because people are going to, or just left theaters. Yeah, a lot of people will lose their jobs, and not just those people who work in those movie theaters or who work on the theatrical distribution side of, the Warner Brothers company. There's a lot that would happen there. And that's a lot of people losing their jobs. There's a big economic effect of that. Hollywood could be facing a new kind of crisis. So yeah, I mean, do we really believe Ted? That's a big question, right? Hunter Iggy saying, I have a theory if Paramount have the same people at the same job at Mike DeLuca and Pam Abdy, just able to replace them with their own people. That's a good question, because Netflix has said they're not going to let those people go. They just got their deals renewed. Pam Abdy and Mike DeLuca are there for a few more years. As are James Gunn and Peter Safran, which John is talking about on DCU Daily right now. Their deals got pushed to 2027, even though their original deals would have ended in 2026. But Paramount they haven't told us what they're going to do. In fact, in their deal, very specifically, Warner Brothers had asked not to specify that. So in their SEC filing, Paramount said, look, we're not saying what we cannot say as per Warner Brothers, what they asked us. We cannot say what we're going to do with all the executives in terms of their future jobs, including David Zaslav, even though they privately had told he would be, David Zaslav, he would be a co-CEO of the new company. Officially, Paramount hasn't specified any of that. So they could easily let go of Pam Abdi and Mike DeLuca and Peter Safran and James Gunn. I don't think they will do that because those people have been doing a really good job and so why do that? But then again, the new Paramount under Skydance has let go a lot of good people from the old Paramount that are now at other studios. So they could just as easily do that, but do we know for sure? No, we don't quite know for sure. But yeah. So that's still up in the air, right? It's still up in the air. And there's an argument to be made that if you do believe Ted Sarandos, that he thinks that Warner Brothers movies being in theaters first before they go on streaming is what gives them a lot of extra value, then maybe they will keep that up, right? And yeah, you're right, Dark Lead Eric. Skydance is still in the process of laying off people from their Paramount merger. So if they add on Warner Brothers, obviously they'll have a plan to lay off probably even more people. They will, that's how they will achieve $6 billion in cost efficiencies. That's all part of the picture. You can look at that as a negative of the Paramount side of the deals, whereas Netflix won't lay off as many people because they don't have a studio. They're not gonna have a lot of as many redundancies as Paramount will have in a business perspective. Now, let's talk about, again, what the other media analysts are saying, what they're expecting moving forward, right? One of the big things that Paramount has said makes their deal superior is that it's going to get through regulatory approvals a lot quicker than the Netflix deal. Because remember, even though Netflix is the one who's got a contract in place for owning Warner Brothers, which Paramount does not, so Netflix has more of a sure thing because it's signed and delivered on paper and it's official. They're not going to actually go through with their merger until after Warner Brothers has spun off Discovery Global late next year. So the clock doesn't start ticking on the Netflix merger officially with Warner Brothers until late 2026. And then whatever amount of time it takes after that, which Netflix said will be 12 to 18 months, that starts next year. Paramount said they can get their thing done in 12 months. And because they're buying all of Warner Brothers Discovery, that ticking clock starts as soon as the deal is signed. Meaning the Paramount, if you go off of the most optimistic suggested timelines by both Netflix and Paramount could have everything done and dusted with the merger with Warner Brothers by the start of 2027 or late 2026, right? If they could do it in 12 months from starting as soon as the deal would be signed. Whereas Netflix, their ticking clock starts late next year and then 12 to 18 months. So if you look at that number, that could be as early as 2020, late 2027 or early 2028, or even as late as late 2028 or maybe even 2029, depending on how the 12 to 18 month timeline where exactly it starts. If it starts the day after Discovery Global, it's its own company, or if that spin-off gets delayed, because there's a lot of moving pieces of that too, because Warner Brothers will want to refinance the debt, basically take out new loans that will be then burdened onto Discovery Global. So that process could be complicated in and of itself. So in the most optimistic timeline, Paramount are saying they'll have their merger completed by the start of 2027. Netflix are saying theirs could be completed by the start of 2028 or probably late 2028, depending on if you do it with a 12 to 18 month window. So Paramount is saying this, look, the faster this gets done, the better it is for the shareholders and the better it is for the company because it provides more certainty to everybody. It's also better for business in general because, like we're going to talk about now, at that UBS conference where a lot of media, analysts are there, and as well as, Ted Sarandos and, Greg Peters showed up as well. And of course, you have a lot of, media moguls attending this. They were saying, look, in the media, industry, basically in Hollywood, the faster you get these deals done, the quicker you're able to implement a strategy because the media landscape changes really quickly. And we know that when AT&T were buying Time Warner, about 10 years ago, they got sued, and that took like a couple of years to clear. When Discovery was buying Warner Brothers Discovery, there was also like delays, and that led them. It basically took longer for Discovery to come in and implement their strategy and start changing shit up at Warner Brothers, start changing how they were doing business. So if the speed is critical, and this is something that not just Paramount is saying, like they'll get this done faster, that they'll have everything across the finish line faster. They're also saying the media analysts agree with the idea that the whichever deal gets done faster, that's the better deal. Part of the reason why Warner Brothers Discovery signed the deal with Netflix last week was because they believed that there was more certainty around the Netflix, because Netflix convinced them that their deal would go through faster because they don't have as many investing partners in there. They don't have any foreign investors. Paramount is saying that doesn't matter because we are paying all cash and everything is backstopped by the Ellisons, so it doesn't matter. This is actually a faster deal, and they're saying Netflix will become more of a monopoly with HBO Max subscribers added on. Whereas Netflix is saying that's not going to be as big of an issue because YouTube is still a bigger player in the market. Disney is still about as big as what we're going to be. So, that's all going to get hashed out, but speed is ultimately the key. If you want to take one piece away from this part of the conversation, is whichever company, is able to complete the deal faster will have the upper hand. From a financial standpoint, and they'll be better ready to like handle whatever comes next. Whatever the next revolution is in the media business, you can't be a part of that if you're still in the process of merging your company with another company, because you can't make any kind of changes. You're sort of like, it's like buying a house. Like you're sort of like stuck. You can't make any renovations to the new house until the deal is done. So if the house is not very good, like all of a sudden, if it's got bad insulation and a winter storm is going to be a really bad winter, you can't do any renovation work to fix that in time for the storm to hit. So you're more likely to be screwed, right? So that's actually a pretty good way to look at it. That's a pretty good analogy. I'll pat myself on the back for that. Hey Deco, welcome back. So that is one of the big things here. And hello, figure drawing. So you're saying Paramount is... who's saying Paramount are squatters? I don't think Paramount are squatters. They did decline. Okay, so Hunter, you good question. Paramount did decline previously that the Saudis were involved in the deal, like in their offer. That was apparently not the last offer they submitted, last week. It was one of the previous offers. The Middle Eastern firms weren't involved. The latest offer that Paramount has, they are part of it. The Saudis, the Qataris, and the Abu Dhabi Wealth Fund, all of them add up about $25 billion just under in the total deal that Paramount has offered, which is worth $108 billion in total. So it's a significant chunk. It's about a quarter of it, a little less than that. But the Ellisons are backing it up. So if the regulators in the US or abroad force those sovereign wealth funds to exit this deal in order for it to go through, the Ellisons will put up that near $25 billion. So that's something that Paramount has said they will do. Now let's talk about what is coming next, right? Because like I said, speed is key. So whichever company takes over, we know inherently Paramount could get it done faster because they're going to have almost a year head start on getting, going with the merger, because Netflix won't really do a lot of that work until Discovery Global becomes a thing late next year. So in essence, there is some definitive truth to what Paramount is saying, because let's say both Netflix and Paramount have the same, period. It takes them the same amount of time to get approval from the government regulators worldwide. Paramount will have almost like a 9-month to a 12-month head start on it versus Netflix. So they will just get across the line faster simply because they started sooner. Just that on that alone, right? Now, Kevin Meyer, who's one of the analysts at this UBS conference this week, again, this key conference that's happening, very timely too. He was one of the key people involved in the Disney-Fox merger back in the day. So he knows a thing or two when he's talking about this stuff. And he was saying, look, we're in for some fireworks. We're in for more fireworks, because this process reminds him of that Disney-Fox merger. Because if you guys remember, the original Disney deal for Fox was for $52.4 billion. And unlike Paramount, which came in with a hostile takeover offer literally days after, Netflix signed the deal with Warner Brothers, Comcast back in the day, it was a few months after Disney and 21st Century Fox had agreed for $52.4 billion. A few months later, Comcast came in and said, look, we're willing to pay a lot more. And they were willing to pay somewhere in the range of 65 billion, if I remember correctly. That, don't quote me in the exact number, but they were willing to pay like a significantly a larger sum of money. But then ultimately what that did is it drove the price up of the deal. It drove Fox's assets prices up. And ultimately Disney had to pay up $71 billion for the deal. Now, you look at that, and Kevin Meyer was a big part of it, and he's saying, look, that offer from Comcast didn't stop Disney from continuing through with this deal. It just drove the price tag higher. And yes, it was a difficult process. It added $19 billion to the price tag for Disney, but it made what was already a good deal into, and it was an exceptional deal when they were paying $52 billion, but it was still a great deal. It was still a good deal when they paid $71 billion. So what Kevin Meyer is basically saying is he wouldn't be surprised if both Paramount and Netflix come in with higher offers. And I'll get into why in a minute, right? He was saying specifically, I think David Ellison has already hinted at that, the idea that, he's expecting better offers from both sides and that he hasn't done his best and final yet. Look, Kevin Meyer expects, like it says here, more fireworks. And New York Post was reporting Paramount might not have to go hostile all the way to thwart this deal with Netflix for Warner Bros. Discovery anyway, because David Zaslav, he's always just wanted the highest, number. He's always wanted the most money. And right now, David Zaslav and co think that by taking the Netflix offer and getting $82.7 billion and then getting whatever money they get from the Discovery spinoff for the shareholders is going to be the better offer, because they believe, their Discovery global networks will be valued more than, what Paramount believes them to be. So if you look at it, ultimately, the Paramount offer is not that much higher than the Netflix offer when you account for the Discovery Global assets, right? And that's where, David Zaslav just sees, he's betting on the fact that Discovery Global will be worth more than what Paramount thinks it will be. But according to one person with direct knowledge of the chief's thinking, of one, David Zaslav's thinking, is that the Ellisons could come back with $35 all cash that covers the $2.8 billion breakup fee, which is what Warner Brothers will have to pay Netflix if they decide to terminate the deal. And then he has to get in a room and decide which offer is best for shareholders. And the Ellisons own it, aka they're saying here that the Ellisons are able to probably go a lot higher before Netflix taps out. Other media insiders are saying Netflix can still go higher. Both companies can go higher, but Paramount, ultimately the Ellisons have a lot more money to spend, whereas Netflix is spending money that they're, are financing to basically leveraging their own company's value. So will the shareholders for Netflix hold up, or will they just be like, this is not worth it for us? Like, why is Netflix doing this? Why are the owners of Netflix doing this? So there's this idea of like, which company will bow out first? Will it be the very cash rich Ellisons, or will it be a publicly traded Netflix company whose shareholders are already wincing at the idea of this deal? For similar reasons that Apple didn't get involved, is because Netflix doesn't do what Warner Brothers does. Why get into a business that you're not familiar with? The shareholders don't like that, because Wall Street thinks they want something that's safe. This isn't safe for Netflix. This is uncharted ground. For Paramount, it's not. Paramount does what Warner Brothers does. Like, they do the same kind of thing. So what we expect to happen from here onwards is that both Netflix and Paramount could go higher in their bidding war until one of them bows out. In the end, what that means is Warner Brothers' sale price will rise until the company is sold. I mean, there is the X factor of either deal could get denied by the regulators. It's unlikely considering what's happened in the past. Ultimately, I think both of them have have enough strong ground and footing to get through the regulators, even if they get sued by the Department of Justice. I think they will still ultimately come out with whichever company ends up winning at the end. They will still end up owning Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers Discovery will be owned by either Paramount or Netflix. The question is, which one of them? And to kind of get an idea of, which company might bow out sooner, I mentioned, look, the Ellisons have more cash to throw at this problem. And It's their own money. They're not relying on the shareholder sentiment. Netflix, and remember, Netflix's offer was partly stock, and that depended on their stock price staying between $119 and some change on the high end and $97 and some change on the low end. Well, that number has dropped. Their stock price was sitting at over $100 last Friday when the deal was announced. It has kept dropping since then. You can see here the chart, and has dropped, currently sitting at $96, which is below that threshold, meaning that offer that Netflix has signed, that their shares are worth less than what they offered. So they might need to put up more cash, and they might need to raise their offer by the time all things are said and done. Whereas you look at, so clearly, just to summarize, Netflix's shareholders don't like this. They're like, this is not good for us. And so their Netflix is feeling the pressure. Their board is feeling that pressure. Paramount, on the other hand, since this has all gone down, they were trading at around $13 at the time, and now they're trading at like $14.62 as of close of business day on Tuesday. So their shareholders like this. It's the total opposite trend. I mean, clearly they're worth a lot less money than Netflix, at the stock market, but they're like, this is good. Like, so clearly the Ellisons had the backing of their shareholders. They also have more money to spend, their own money to spend. Whereas Netflix, their deal is entirely predicated on their stock, mostly on their stock value and what Netflix as a company is valued at. And their stock is going down. So Netflix may not have as much wiggle room to make this work for them, whereas Paramount has a lot more to play with. And even if they both ultimately have similar buying power, one of them feels a lot more pressure, from their shareholders than the other one does. So clearly, I would say, that's one in Paramount's corner in terms of like, if you want to check a box, that's one more for Paramount. But ultimately, the box you really want to check is the Warner Brothers Discovery box, because look at their share price, guys. This I'm going to look at the 5-day number. Look at how this shot up. They were trading at around $25 and 96 cents when the deal was announced, and boom, like straight up on the wall, it's gone up in a matter of 5 days to $28.30. That's a big jump. And if you account for what they were trading at before Paramount started submitting offers, when they first started submitting offers, they were trading at like $12 and some change, meaning they have more than doubled their stock price from when Paramount initially started submitting bids to when the official bidding process started to now. Warner Brothers stock price keeps going up, up, and up. It's still at $30, which Paramount is offering. So Paramount is still technically offering more than the company is worth on the stock market. But I bet you if Paramount's offer goes through, that number will keep on rising. It might even go beyond 30. So what do I think at the end of the day is going to end up happening here? Here's what I'm going to say. And this is where we'll wrap things up. I think ultimately what's going to happen here is, hello, Caleb, by the way, and hello, Enterprising, everybody else in this in the live chat. Ultimately, both Netflix and Paramount will have escalating bids. They will both end up, bidding for a higher number. But who will win? I want to say right now the advantage is with Paramount. I think Paramount has more money to spend and less pressure from their shareholders and stockholders. So they're more likely to keep going up higher. Like, for example, if Paramount submits a bid of $35 or $40 per share, I don't think Netflix is going to, come back with an offer that's the same amount or not. Because Netflix was already overpaying for Warner Brothers Discovery. Remember, they're paying for just the streaming and studios, whereas Paramount is paying for the whole thing. And their offers are not all that far off on a dollar value amount, right? $18 billion is the difference in terms of pure value, but it's not as big of a difference when you look at like the overall. They're still both paying close to $100 billion, Paramount over 100. So I would say more likely right now, if I was a betting man, I would say Paramount is more likely to win this. But of course, you got Netflix there. They've got the one advantage is they've got a signed deal. Like Paramount has to overturn the situation in their favor, whereas you know Netflix has already got a deal in place. So Netflix could, if things stay the way they are, Paramount can't do anything about it. Like, unless they're able to change enough shareholders' minds to then basically replace the Warner Brothers board with their own people and then take over. So Yeah, I mean, look, both of the companies have downsides. Like, Netflix would be far and away the streaming monopoly in a lot of ways you look at it. The streaming wars will be basically over at that point because Netflix would have twice as many, or more than twice as many streaming subscribers as Disney potentially, and a bunch, and YouTube would be a big rival, but YouTube has a very different business model. So there's a lot of things there. Paramount, of course, what they've been doing under Skydance, the changes at CBS News, and a lot of other things. You gotta wonder, like, if Paramount is the better option anyway. Like, it's which one of them is the better of two evils. But right now, if I had to make a pick, I would just say Paramount has the lead because Paramount has more room to go up on their deal, and Netflix is more likely to walk away sooner than Paramount will. So it's just a matter of how far Paramount is willing to go. They can go higher probably than Netflix, but are they willing to? That's the key. Ultimately, the winner in all of this is, the guy on the thumbnail with the biggest head in the thumbnail, and that is David Zaslav, because there, when he took over Warner Brothers, and made Warner Brothers Discovery a thing, basically that company was trading at around $8 a share, $7, $8 a share. It ended up, it was trading at $12 when all of this started earlier this year. Now it's trading at 28 some dollars, per share. That's a big ass jump. That's like almost four times as what it was trading at when Warner Brothers Discovery was created a few years ago. So David Zaslav ends up, making out really well from this, and he's got a lot of stock options he will cash out on, I'm sure, as well. So Warner Brothers Discovery is the winner at the end of the day, depending on whoever buys it. And well, we'll actually just wait and see what ultimately ends up happening. But I hope this helped you guys get a better understanding of where everything is from the financial side of things, what's likely to happen, and where we are at right now. It still looks like it's very much an open deal. This is not done yet. Far from it. Yeah, CNN will probably be a casualty regardless of which direction this goes, because they'll end up having a lot of changes. They might even get spun off eventually. Hey, Bane will break you. Netflix has a better spine because they have a growing streaming business. Netflix is not going anywhere. Paramount Skydance is more of an unproven company, unproven entity. The current version of Paramount Skydance, is only been around for a few months. So we don't really know, what they're capable of. What their leadership team can do in the long term. So yeah, we'll have to just wait and see which direction this goes in. Again, I look, in an ideal world, Apple would have bought them, but Apple's not doing it because their shareholders would have not loved it either. I would have liked to, in an ideal world, the ideal world for Warner Brothers to just stay separate and in its own company, but that's not the world we live in. So Paramount and Netflix are in it, and they're in it to win it. I'm gonna say right now Paramount has the edge, but Netflix is not that far behind. In fact, the current offers are pretty close together. So the ultimate winning deal is gonna need to end up being, probably higher than either of the company's deals, on the table right now. And Warner Brothers, remember, they're gonna respond by December 19th, so that's next Friday. So we're gonna keep an eye out on what they recommend, and if they decide to stick with the Netflix deal, if they change their mind, there's probably a chance that Paramount might come in with a higher offer by then. And if they do, maybe Netflix will respond. Right now, the two offers on the table are pretty close to each other, although Paramount might have a slight edge, purely on the money side, but it also depends on how you look at it. So we'll keep an eye on this. And remember, we're going to have Tier List Tuesday coming up soon. Depending on where you're watching from, it might already be Wednesday for you. If you're not watching live, that's okay. But remember to tune in and hit the like button on your way out. Hit subscribe if you're new, because we'll keep following this story, and we'll just have to wait and see who ends up buying and owning Warner Brothers Discovery in the long term. Until then, guys, let us know what you think about all of this in the comments. We love and appreciate that. It helps the YouTube gods, spread this video in the algorithm. And of course, hit the notification bell so you know when we're going to be live with Tier List Tuesday, which will be in a few minutes. I just got to go, rest my voice for a minute, maybe get a drink of water or ginger ale. I'll go see what John is up to. He just finished up BCU Daily, and then we'll be right back with Tier List Tuesday. Until then, we'll see you next time. And well, it's gonna be a fun one, guys. It's gonna be a fun one. The ride ain't over yet, my man.